Gay, it's so good to see you again. And I recognize that spot where you're filming this interview in your home in Ojai. I visited you twice. I've sat on that very spot next to your computer. It's it's just so great to see you again and to get caught up on all the amazing ideas you've been putting forth in the world.
Well, thank you. I'm always glad to talk to you. You're one of my main sources for what's happening at the front edge of things in the world. So you're always welcome to sit on that couch over there.
And Gay, as I mentioned, we always start these trainings with a specific question. So I'd love to know what gets you out of bed every morning.
Well, I'm an early riser, and so I really cherish the time between, say, 4:45 in the morning and about 7:30 in the morning, because it's solo time for me to really delve down deep into my own solo creativity. My wife likes to sleep in. Katie likes to sleep in till around 7:30 or so. And so those first few hours of the morning is where I get a lot of my writing done. And oftentimes, even before I wake up, I'm already thinking about what I want to work on that day. Some of you may know this and some of you may not, but I also in my spare time write mystery novels about a Tibetan Buddhist private eye. And so I'm about to publish my fifth one, and CBS just bought them to turn into a television series, so we're very excited about them. The reason I mention that is oftentimes what wakes me up in the morning is telling that story about what's happening next with my mystery character, because I switch back and forth between writing mysteries and writing nonfiction books.
That's incredible. I can't wait to see that show on CBS.
Me too. I'm very excited about it. So I think the creative spark is what wakes me up. Somebody recently described me as the most curious person they'd ever met, and I took that as a high compliment because ever since I could walk pretty much, I've been driving the adults crazy by saying, hey, why does that work? Or how does it work that way? Or why don't grandpa and grandma ever speak to each other? And, all these different kinds of things I was wondering about. And I haven't stopped to this day. And I decided when I was a teenager that I didn't want to do just one thing in life. I wanted to kind of be a multi-purpose, or what I called a Renaissance man at the time. I wanted to take part in political things, and I wanted to write poetry, and I wanted to be in business, and also wanted to write fiction. And so I've managed to craft a life where I can do all the things I most love to do.
Which is perfect because of the topic of this interview. Because the first belief, the first model of reality we're going to be talking about that you have, and it so shows in what you've just been telling us about your curiosity and your creativity, is that we all have within us a deep creative wellspring of genius that we can consciously invite forth. So let's talk about that.
Yes. Well, one of the things, I reread my book, The Big Leap, back here, and one of the two big ideas that's in The Big Leap, just to make it real concise, one of them is the problem of the upper limit problem, the tendency to sabotage yourself when things are going well. So that's a thing that I work with a lot of entrepreneurs on in our Conscious Entrepreneurs program. The other thing is about the second idea that's in The Big Leap is how to create a life in your zone of genius, how to dig yourself out of your zones of incompetence and competence, and even ultimately transcend your zone of excellence in favor of what I call your zone of genius. And my big discovery after working now with about 20,000 people over the past 40 years or so is that human beings everywhere have this incredible deep zone of genius in themselves, and most people don't even realize that. And one of the most exciting things that gets me out of bed in the morning is the possibility that sometime during the day I'm going to have the opportunity to transmit that idea to more and more people. So I think that we all need to know that we have that zone of genius inside, and that we won't feel really fulfilled until we've tapped into that and brought that forth. And so I think that one of the great keys to life satisfaction, no matter if you're 25 or 70 or 50 or however old you are or how seasoned you are in the business world or in your professional life, no matter where you are, you always have the option of opening up to more of your zone of genius. It's infinite, it's endless. And once you begin to make your life an inquiry into how much of your genius you can reveal, I promise you, a very exhilarating ride that, I 40 years ago, I told somebody I wanted to create a job I would never want to retire from. And here it is, and so I would never want to retire from transmitting these ideas because to me, they're the essence of how life really works.
If a psychic had come up to you when you were 60 and said, you're going to publish 5 mystery novels over the next decade, you would have thought, that's ridiculous. But what was it about you? Was there something unique or different about you? Where at 60, you decided to go down a completely different path?
Well, I think at the time, I just written a nonfiction bestseller. And so I was kind of basking in the aftermath of that and had done, 500 different interviews on that book and that kind of thing. And so I was really tired from writing nonfiction books. I'd basically written a nonfiction book a year since 1975. And so I have 40 of them out there now. And so I kind of woke up out of this trance of thinking that I needed to write a book a year and realized I'm going to take some time off. Well, during that time off, which turned out to be about 3 weeks, I realized that I didn't want to stop writing, but I wanted to start writing about something that I didn't know about and something that I could invent every day. And I'd always loved to read mystery novels ever since I got hooked on Sherlock Holmes when I was a kid. And I used to read so many Sherlock Holmes stories that my English teacher, when I was in the high school, called me Sherlock all the time as a nickname. And so I decided to just sit down in the backyard out there under an umbrella by the swimming pool. It was a beautiful day, and I just decided to start sketching out what I might write about. And I couldn't think of anything at the time, but that night when I went to sleep, I woke up about 3 a.m. with this idea. And it had to do with a Tibetan Buddhist monk named Tenzing Norbu, and his friends called him Ten for short. And it was just like this idea sprang forth, and I actually visualized in my mind, I saw him standing on a cliff here in Southern California called the Pacific Palisades that looks out over the Pacific. And he was standing there looking back toward Asia. And I began a dialogue with him. I said, basically, who are you and what are you doing standing there? And he told me he was a detective and he'd come to the United States to teach meditation when he was a teenager, sponsored by the Dalai Lama, but he'd ended up getting a job with the police department and kind of fallen into being a detective. But now he was trying to reconcile his Americanness with his Asian roots, and he didn't know where that was going to take him. And so that was kind of the dilemma that was going on in his life. And he also had some issues with his father, who was a very powerful man who ran a monastery. So I'm telling you all this because the details of this reveal why I think I needed to do this at the time, because it was like something was calling me to create a world I'd never seen before, because I'd spent so much time dealing with reality over the past 40 years. I mean, counseling 20,000 people is, a lot of time in the saddle and a lot of seminars and that kind of thing. And so I think I'd kind of learned a lot of things I needed to learn about that and wanted to invent some brand new world. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but the fact is that it gave me access to a level of my creativity I think I'd never accessed before. And I think that's important, Vishen, because at a certain age, especially in the second half of life, in your 40s and on, up through your 50s and 60s and 70s and so on, what happens is you get increasingly called upon to be more authentic and in line with your real life purpose. And if you're not, you get this real stressful wobble in your life that leads to a lot of despair. And so Erik Erikson, the great developmental psychologist at Harvard, said that every day after 50 or so, or every day after midlife, you make a choice every day between generativity and stagnation. And so I feel like at any age, you need to keep that sort of electric new edge of your creativity open all the time. And that's what gives my life its driving purpose.
That's beautiful. So a key model there is not just that we have a deep wellspring of genius within us, but that there is no period in your life where your creativity has to start going into decline. And I love what you said. every day you're making a choice to continue creating more.
One of my great heroes, Buckminster Fuller, somebody asked him at the end of his life, up until he was in his 80s, Buckminster Fuller was still filing patents. I think he had more than 500 patents by the time he passed away. But they asked him, how do you stay so creative? What's the essence of your continued brilliance? And he says, it's one simple thing. I'm willing to make more mistakes than anybody else I know. And so, even into his 80s, he was always living on the edge. And I respect that so much because, I don't know about you, but I grew up around a lot of people that almost seem to have given up on life in midlife and were kind of going through the motions. A lot of people in the little town that I lived in seemed that way, and even people in my own family. And I didn't know how to describe it at the time, but I think I felt a wellspring of compassion for that, but also a driving desire not to create anything less than the maximum aliveness I possibly could during my time here on Earth.
But Gay, is there a way for the average man, is there a way that they could tap into that creativity? Like how would one do it?
Well, I think, let me give a kind of a metaphysical answer and then a couple of very precise practical answers. The one thing that I think human beings need to tune themselves up with on a daily basis is the experience of wonder, authentic wonder, coming from a place of not knowing. And that is such an incredible place to be that I think it's one of the great positive addictions in life, is when you can float free of your belief systems and not have to be right or not have to shade reality a certain way to fit your belief systems, to be completely open to the creative edge of the universe. That to me is exalted living, whether it's in business or the arts or wherever you are, to be living on the edge of that wonder. So bring more wonder into your life is a metaphysical and practical thing. But on a daily basis, let me tell you a couple of things that I couldn't live with, I wouldn't want to live with. I learned how to meditate in the early 1970s and have now had more than 40 years of daily meditation without missing a day since 1973. And I'm very devoted to it, not because I'm more disciplined than the average citizen, but because it feels good. I don't want to start my day without a period of that clarity that comes from meditation. So before I start writing every day, you'll see me sitting in that couch where you and your beautiful wife have sat, and I will have meditated before I go writing in the morning, and then I do it again in the evening. But to me, a daily practice of some sort of stillness, and how you do it is pretty much up to you. I love meditation. Some people do breathwork type meditation. I'm come from an Indian tradition of a mantra meditation, and so that's what I use. But whatever you do, I think it's a period of stillness where you worship and celebrate the stillness that can be possible within us human beings. And so I wouldn't want to live with that every day. Also, for me, the practice of relationship as a spiritual path has been incredibly important in my life. I realized when I was in my early 30s that I knew how to be happy, but I didn't know how to be happy in a relationship. And I realized I really didn't know anything. I'd had any number of kind of relationship disasters in my teens and 20s, but by the time I got to my early 30s, I realized I want to figure out where the problem has been in my relationship history. And so I began to wonder into that, and I realized that I was making three big mistakes in relationship. And I realized I didn't always tell the truth. I wasn't always authentic. I didn't know how to express my feelings. And any number of women had said, "You don't ever say how you're feeling." And it used to drive me nuts to hear that, because it was like they were asking me to speak some language that I didn't know how to speak. And so, but anyway, I came up with the fact that I was inauthentic. I didn't always tell the truth. The second thing is, when under stress, I would often blame the other person rather than taking responsibility myself for whatever was coming up. And the third thing, I ended up in a couple of long-term relationships where I was sort of, I did my creativity every day. I always took time to write and that kind of thing. And so the other person often complained to me that I was taking too much time for things like that. And so I wanted to kind of order up from the universe a woman who was very creative herself that wouldn't ever hassle me about that. And so that was kind of a self-serving one, but I wanted a creative partner. So I kind of put that out into the world as a sort of a prayer or an intention. And a month later, I met my mate now of 35 years. And so I've become a big believer in manifestation, kind of getting clear about what you want inside and then letting that draw to you the very thing that you want in the world rather than having to stressfully pursue things.
I know, and you and Katie make such a beautiful couple. Now, as we were planning for this training, you mentioned something about no matter where you are, what your circumstance, you have the innate power to change your life in the direction you desire. And you said that you activated that power through a heartfelt commitment. A 10-second commitment you made in 1969 resulted in you, well, firstly, meeting Katie, creating a career you love, but also losing 100+ pounds and keeping it off. What was that 10-second commitment, and is that a technique you can teach us?
Well, in 1969, you got to picture me, I weighed 320 pounds rather than the 180 I weigh today, and
wow,
I'm in good shape. I'm 6 feet tall, so 180 looks good on me. So I weighed 140 pounds more, and obesity had run in my family, and I had inherited something that, I was a very obese kid, even before I went to school. If you looked at pictures of me, I was more round than I was tall. And so up until my 20s, on this particular day in 1969, I was 24 years old, and I was also in a relationship that was very toxic at the time, and I didn't like my job, and I was living in New Hampshire, and I hated it. It was too cold. I'd grown up in Florida, and New Hampshire was driving me crazy, and so I wanted to live in California. So anyway, everything was wrong in my life. My weight, I also smoked 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Wow. And I also wore big, thick glasses. I had 2400 vision. So I was ripe for a big change in my life. And I went out for a walk, and I slipped and fell on the road and kind of whacked myself. And it didn't knock me out, but I like to think it kind of knocked me to my senses in a way. Because as I was laying there, I think I took a couple of minutes for the first time in my life to actually feel myself all the way down to the core. And I made this really fascinating discovery that at the center of ourselves, human beings are pure consciousness, that there's no programming on it. And yet we get lost in our programming, the things we've had to do to learn how to survive and get recognition and those kinds of things. We get lost in our programming so that we lose touch with that spiritual essence of ourselves that's there free for the taking all the time. It's nothing that needs to be bestowed on us. It's just there as a representative of the spiritual element of the universe. And so we can be in touch with that. So that moment was the first time I connected with that when I was 24 years old. And I spent a few minutes in that state, and it was the most delicious thing. Then what happened is I began to have the upper limit problem. I think I didn't know how to let myself feel that good. And so I could feel my old persona assembling itself. I could feel my tense muscles, and I could feel the urge to smoke a cigarette, and I could feel myself coming back into knowing that I had to go back home to that relationship. But here's something I did that was totally amazing later in its consequences. I made a commitment, and it only took 10 seconds to make this commitment. I said to the universe, I commit to feeling this way in every moment of my life. This is what I want. I want to do whatever's possible to feel this way all the time, feel connected to that spiritual essence. And up until that time, I'd never been a religious person by far. It'd been many years since I'd been into a church or anything like this. But this was kind of like, it wasn't religious in the sense of a dogma. It was like an actual feeling of spiritual connection. And so here was what happened after I made that commitment. The next day, a friend of mine called me and said he was going over to visit one of his old Harvard professors who'd just come back from India, and he wanted to hear what the guy had to say. It turned out to be Ram Dass in 1969, who had just come back from India, and he had all his robes on. And so he'd been my buddy's Harvard professor. And so we went over there and hung out and listened to Ram Dass speak all afternoon. And at the end of it, I went up to Ram Dass and I said two things. I said, first of all, I was blown away that you could speak for 3 hours without any notes. Where do you get that stuff? Where does it come from? And he tried to explain it to me, and it sounded so, he talked about feeling plugged into a source, and then the words just came forth. And I mean, it really sounded like he was speaking Swahili or something to me. I didn't get it. So I learned in that moment that he was coming from a different place than I was. And I said, how do I do that? How do I get to that place? Because I just had this experience yesterday, but I had to fall on my back to have the experience. And he said, go learn some breathing exercises and some meditation. And I said, well, where would I learn something like that? I don't know anything about that. And he said, well, something will come to you. And that sounded very mysterious, but I said, okay, I didn't want to press the guy. So the next day I was in the supermarket and I was standing in line to check out, and there on the shelf next to the checkout was a book called Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation by Jess Stern. And I remember it was so long ago, it cost 95 cents. That was how long ago it was. And so I bought that book. And what it turned out to be was a compendium of meditation exercises, breathing exercises, yoga exercises, just basically what Ram Dass had said, and it had come to me. And so I was amazed by that. So I took it home that afternoon, and the woman I lived with at the time was off visiting someone else, and I just started doing the exercises one after the other at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And by midnight, I'd kind of worked my way through the book, and I was feeling better than I'd ever had in my life. I was feeling that same way. So remember my intention, my commitment of I want to feel that way in daily life, basically within 24 or 36 hours had manifested itself. So that to me seemed like one of the first real life miracles I could get my head around. And I just started living, what I started to do was eating food that fed that feeling rather than my old body. So I started eating fruit rather than hot dogs and ice cream for lunch. And I started eating, things like salads, which to me had seemed strange and inedible before. And so all of these things I started to prefer because that's what fed this spirit part of me. So that led to losing more than 100 pounds over the next year or so.
That's incredible. And all because, let's recap. You fell down on your back. You went into, and from that fall, you questioned your life, you felt a connection, you felt a feeling, and you just made a commitment that you want to feel like that all the time. And you said in 36 hours, you ended up having a conversation with Ram Dass, you ended up picking up your book on meditation, your first ever book on meditation, you ended up meditating, you ended up deciding to change your diet. That's just mind-blowing.
It really is mind-blowing. And I get letters sometimes from obesity researchers because apparently only like 1 or 2% of people lose a lot of weight like I did and then keep it off for 40 years. A lot of people lose a lot of weight but tend to gain it back. So I get letters from obesity researchers asking me to contribute to their study because I'm one of that rare group of people. And I think I feel blessed in a way because in that first experience, it was such a clear experience of that spiritual essence of ourselves that I couldn't deny it. It's just like once you learn how to swim, or learn how to ride a bicycle or one of those kinds of things, it's kind of like in your body because you can feel it down in the center of yourself. And so there's no question about it. And that feeling has stayed with me ever since. That's why I meditate every day, because it gives me a much clearer homing in on that feeling.
That's such a beautiful idea. Now, Gay, how could the average person listening here get into that state where they could make such a powerful commitment?
A couple of things. One is I would begin, if you don't know any other kind of meditation, to use your organic, natural body wisdom. So, for example, just sit for 10 minutes and be aware of your breathing, something simple like that. Just find a place where you can focus. So it's kind of a daily immersion of some kind. So I like to use simple things like I use a mantra to kind of come down into that open, quiet space. Other people use breathing. I have a good friend, Jack Cornfield, who's made a whole life out of teaching breathing meditation to people. And so my detective hero, Tenzing Norbu, also practices breathing meditation. He comes from a Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And so, but whatever it is, I'd say just take 10 or 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you can get in there, and just devoted to your stillness, devoted to that inner world. Because like one of my clients put it, she has several children, and she says, if I take an hour to myself, I can give back 23, but if I don't take that hour to myself, I can't even give one. And so it's that we need to balance out our in and our out, our in breath with our out breath, our taking in for ourselves and our giving out to others. That's how we stay in balance in life. And I've had the pleasure of working with more than 800, my colleague and I, and my wife Katie, with more than 800 business professionals now, CEOs and high-level executives over the past 40 years. And one of the things we always teach them is how to meditate. And so it's like at the top of the list when they come here, we show them how to go inside. And some of them already know that, but many don't. And you wouldn't believe just what the power of just going inside for 10 minutes really does. There's a great quotation from the philosopher Blaise Pascal 400 years ago. He said, all of humankind's troubles stem from the inability to sit alone in our room by ourselves for 10 minutes doing nothing.
I love that quote. So the importance of meditation, I'm so glad that you double stress that in this interview, because I try to convince everyone I can that this is one of the single most important practices they can do every day. But my question to you is, what I find very fascinating about what you said was that commitment. So a lot of people meditate, but a lot of people never make a commitment that powerful to shift their lives. How could we, assuming we already meditate, what could we do to create that commitment?
I think well, first of all, I think the lack of commitment ultimately comes down to a lack of loving regard for yourself. In other words, if you make a commitment to practice meditation every day, and you do, that says to you and the world that you have a living commitment to being more of who you can be. And so that to me is, at the root of everything. And I think that if you can't make that commitment, kind of go in there and say, where did I come up with the idea that I'm not worth it? Where did I take the idea in that I'm not worth committing 20 minutes a day to, or half an hour a day to? So kind of be frank with yourself like that. Be honest with yourself like that. The second thing that I wanted to mention too is at a certain point, I think every wise person needs to take on relationship itself as a spiritual path, relationship itself as a living meditation. Because where is your meditation is if you say, don't bother me, honey, I'm meditating right now. If your actions aren't in harmony with your spiritual essence. And so I think you can learn more about your spiritual development in 10 minutes with your beloved than you could with 10 minutes with your guru, because you see all the places there where you need to love yourself more or love your beloved more. You find all the edges, all the places where you're not loving toward yourself or toward your beloved. And if you have kids, toward your kids. And so it's a constant living meditation. But here's the thing, I think most people haven't committed to that as a practice. And so therefore they resent the constant stuff that goes on in relationship. But I think if everyone made a living, right now, real time, right now commitment to, I commit to using my relationships themselves as a form of meditation, as a form of the deepest learning about myself. To make a commitment like that gets you in the game. It takes you out of kind of not being willing to participate fully. So, you can learn more in 10 minutes with your beloved as if you make that commitment to being fully open to whatever you need to learn. So that's a great thing. I wish somebody had told me about 35 years ago.
Beautiful, Gay. Now, you also mentioned earlier when you were talking about falling, you mentioned the upper limit problem. What is that?
It's one of the two key concepts in the Big Leap. Here it is. Even successful people, in fact, particularly successful people, often have a few hidden pockets left in them of old unconscious stuff that causes them to reach up and sabotage themselves when things are going well. It causes you to slip down below your level of optimum well-being. So most of us haven't learned yet to live at our full optimal level of well-being. And so what happens, we touch into it, and then we find a way to sabotage ourselves and knock ourselves back down to where we were before. And so I think that any really growth-oriented person needs to pay attention to this phenomenon, because it's really changed my life in relationship as well as just regular life. See, like if you go on a diet, most people get going good for a couple of days and then slip off, and then they eat a bunch of stuff that they crave, and then they try to get back on, and they have a couple of days and they slip off. And the upper limit problem is the same way in other areas of life too. Like in the relationship area, we always ask the couples that come here to work with us to study this in their relationship, because what happens is there's a brief period of feeling good, and then somebody starts an argument, or somebody breaks an agreement, or somebody does something with one of the kids that the other doesn't like, or there's all sorts of stuff like that that goes on in every relationship. And so people use those things as an upper limit and push themselves back down below their optimum level of intimacy. And so one of the things that we need to study in ourselves is, what does our upper limit look like? And so I learned early on that worry was one of my upper limits, that things would be going good, feeling good, everything's going great, and then I'd start saying, oh, I wonder what happened with my daughter, and oh gosh, did she remember to do this, and oh gosh, she's away from home for the first time. And then I realized that I did worry all the time as a way to kind of knock myself back down. And so now I kind of, thanks to all the years of meditation and everything, I don't have many worry thoughts anymore. But when I do, I mostly see them as symptoms of not being able yet to fully, 100% of the time, be at my optimum level of well-being.
I see. Is there a particular way that one could help identify their upper limits?
One is to listen to the things that you complain about. And if you pay attention to listening to what you complain about, that will tell you, especially anything that you've complained about 3 or more times that hasn't changed yet. Okay, so that's a real good place to start. So like, for example, if you've complained about your weight 3 or more times and it hasn't changed, you're using your weight as an upper limit problem as a buffer against your creativity. And so the symptom is not to go on the solution is not to go on a new diet. That may happen later, but the first big thing to do is to make a new living commitment to your creative edge, to bringing forth that which truly satisfies the craving in human beings. So make a deeper commitment to your creativity, and think of food as a kind of a symptom of where you are with that. If you're eating completely healthy food and getting your normal weight, that lets you know that you're really using your creativity well. So that would be one good thing to keep an intention on, is to listen to anything that you complain about, particularly 3 or more times. Relationship, if you're complaining 3 or more times, to your beer drinking buddy about relationship and your relationship hasn't changed, well, you're using relationship then as your upper limit, and you've got some clearing up to do in the relationship. And so we need to get into studying what our upper limits are, but do it in a benign, friendly, heart open way. Don't do it like shooting darts at yourself or anything like that. It's not like a gotcha sort of a thing. It's like being more aware of how you keep yourself down in your other zones. Your zone of excellence is a good zone to live in. Other people like it a lot because you make them a lot of money and it provides for lots of people. But you're never going to be fully satisfied, no matter who you are, until you fully flower into that zone of genius and build your life out of that.
Oh, beautifully said. And you just made me realize that I have an upper limit problem in a particular area of my life. It's too personal to share here, but it's the thing I've been complaining about endlessly. Well, you know what? We're going to be talking about authenticity next, right? So I want to be authentic. I realize I have an upper limit problem right now with wealth, because I've been complaining about this bank that I'm dealing with and how bureaucratic and crazy it is, because, as you know, I have a book coming out, and so I get royalty now as an author. And I've been frustrated at the bank and frustrated that my royalty checks have been disappearing or being miscalculated. But I realized that isn't the royalty check, it isn't the bank, it's an upper limit problem with me being, I guess, slightly uncomfortable with suddenly having this whole new income stream and opportunity open up for me.
Well, this is a good conversation to have, Vishen, because one of the things I've observed, I had the pleasure, as you know, a couple of years ago of being at your Awesomeness Fest out in Maui, where I can still remember that great band we danced to. My wife and I love to dance, and we wore out our socks that night, I think. But one thing I noticed about your team is how vibrant they are and how much they have taken ownership and how much you have, kind of shined your light on them rather than keeping it all to yourself. And I mentioned that because now into your life comes this sort of individual stream of stuff that isn't dealt with as a team and doesn't have anything to do with that. And that brings about a whole different set of things in work and family and marriage and the whole gestalt of your life.
Right. Thank you for pointing that out. That is true. That is an upper limit problem I'm dealing with. It's like you're part of a band and you decide to quit and go solo for a while still being part of the band, and you're dealing with all those issues. That's what I'm dealing with right now, having a business as an author in my own right without my massive and wonderful team at Mindvalley. Thank you for that. Thank you for making me see that. Now, we want to go on. So I wanted to share that because I wanted to be authentic about a gap I'm facing, because authenticity is something that we're going to be talking about next. In your words, authenticity is not only essential for staying in integrity, it is also a powerful manifestation tool. Authenticity is made up of actions like getting what you feel inside lined up with what you say, and getting yourself lined up inside and out with your chosen life purpose. Being authentic is like riding a unicycle. It takes a while to get graceful at it, so be patient with clunkiness at first.
One of the things that I used to hear this frequent complaint about, you never tell me your feelings. You won't ever say how you feel. And women would ask me, how are you feeling right now? I was like, I don't know. I'm hungry. It was very superficial. And they were very patient with me, but I heard that complaint a lot, but I always thought it had to do with them. I always thought, oh, they're too sensitive to that kind of thing. Well, to me, now learning how to, when I was in my 20s and early 30s, especially in my relationship with Katie, learning how to say things like, I feel sad, or I feel scared right now, or I don't know what to do right now, or I'm not sure about how to proceed here. Things that I wouldn't have ever said to somebody before. To be able to speak your feelings in a straightforward way, in an easygoing way. I mean, you've got them in your body, but you're also speaking about them in a straightforward, clear way, that's to me a sign of good living. That's been something that has taken me years and years, decades to learn, but I'm very grateful for it every day of my life because I know where I came from with it. And my original family was 30,000 times more repressed, and so they, you didn't even get a smile out of those folks, and so I really have treasured this experience of authenticity, being lined up with your purpose inside, with my purpose inside, and seeing that manifest outside. Like inside my life purpose, I defined as I expand in love and creativity every day as I inspire others to do the same. That's my purpose. And so I've been able to do that since I figured that out in 1977. I figured out what I really wanted out of life. And so I've been basically occupied in doing that ever since, leading up to this very moment. One of the things that makes it possible is that spirit of authenticity where I pay attention carefully and recommend that people do that come to see me, that they pay attention very carefully to the gap between how they're feeling inside and what they say. Because every time you miss the opportunity to speak your sadness or speak your joy or speak your excitement or speak your wonder, every time you miss that opportunity, you miss out on the ability to share intimacy with other people. And I can tell you from having visited many deathbeds in my life, when people are on their last breaths, one of the things they are wondering about and being with is the lack of connection with certain people. And so I don't want my life to be like that. I don't want your life to be like that. I don't want anybody's life, if I can possibly help it, is to value the relationships and value the authenticity in relationships almost above everything else. Because if you're successful in business, but your relationships are a problem, what's the point, and they don't feel good. And it can work the other way around too. Your relationships can be great and your business skills can not be good, but that can be learned oftentimes if you're willing. A lot of times I've found, though, that when people come to us with relationship problems, one of the first things we have to do with them is get them committed to solving the problem. Because one person might be committed to getting out of the relationship. The other person is committed to solving the problem, but the other person isn't. And so in business, too, getting people aligned with commitments is so incredibly important. It's that kind of authenticity, I think, though, that makes getting up and going to work in the morning a joy rather than a chore.
And so this, what you're saying then, to make sure I understand you, is that we shouldn't be afraid to talk about what's really going on with ourselves, whether it's good or bad, to our business partners, to the people we work with, and especially to the people we're in a relationship with.
That's exactly it. And the more I've learned to do that, the better things have gone in my life. I've created most of my wealth since I made that discovery. And so and most of my wealth, actually original wealth, didn't come from business. I later on learned how to create businesses. That's one thing I'm kind of passionate about, is conscious entrepreneuring. And I learned how to create businesses, two of which I've sold, but others I keep going. And so I'm very interested in the real world application of these ideas that we're talking about, because if they're just ideas, there's no point to them. But if you can say, wow, I created wealth out of that, or I created great jobs for people out of that, or whatever your thing is, to be able to turn these ideas into something that has manifested in real world is a great sense of joy to me.
Beautifully said. Now, you also mentioned that you've coached hundreds of business executives over the last 40 years, and one of the key things that you tell them is the awesome power of taking responsibility. So we've spoken about commitment, we've spoken about authenticity. We've spoken about the upper limit. Let's talk about responsibility, the power of taking responsibility.
The big thing, Vishen, is that you've got to understand what real, genuine, creative responsibility feels like and is. Most people, when they think of responsibility, think of it as a blame or a burden, because they've had a authoritarian figure saying, you better take responsibility for that. You know, it's used as a weapon or a club. And if you grow up in a family where that's used a lot, as I did, then you get that feeling of responsibility is kind of a bad thing, and you don't want to take it. The other thing that many people have is the sense of responsibility is a burden. That by taking responsibility for something, you're taking on a burden. And in many cultures I've been into around the world that speak different languages than English, a couple of them haven't even had a word for responsibility that doesn't mean burden. And so it's kind of built into a lot of us. So the only kind of responsibility that matters is when you freely choose to take it yourself. So if you freely choose to take responsibility for creating the kind of love you want in your relationship, you will get that. But if your partner repeatedly says to you, you've got to take responsibility for this, you know, you can't have it laid on you from outside. Same thing with your weight. 500 people, if you're overweight or whatever, could say to you, you've got to lose weight. But till the moment that I said, okay, I choose to live in my spirit and get a body that matches that. That was a different kind of commitment. That wasn't losing weight. That was being who I really was. And the weight then just kind of fell off as my body didn't need it anymore. And so the kind of responsibility that changes lives is you freely choose it. You say, okay, I take responsibility for that. Okay, I own that. And that's a powerful move because that also connects you up with the creative source of the universe. Because if you're denying that you had a part in creating something, you're pushing away the creative. But the moment you say, oh, okay, I get that somehow I created this. I don't understand it yet, but I created it because I'm here and it happened. So the moment that kind of responsibility is taken, boom, human beings become mega forces.
I love that. So let's recap, because you've been sharing with us a number of different models and a number of different systems. So to recap for the people who are listening, the first model of reality you said is that within us we all have a deep creative wellspring of genius. Then you went on to, no matter what, where or what your circumstances are, you have the innate power to change your life in any direction you choose through the power of making a commitment. Then we spoke about the upper limit problem and how all of us have, I'm going to read this from you, all of us have a genius within that can be awakened, unique abilities and aspects of ourselves that are the ultimate keys to our success in work and love. To fully awaken that genius, most of us have to confront and lay to rest 4 specific fears. The fear of outshining others, the fear that our success will bring burden, the fear that if we want to go to the full level of success, it will cause us to abandon, leave behind, and be disloyal to loved ones. And 4th, the fear that somehow we do not deserve success. These fears trigger what I call the upper limit problem, the tendency to sabotage ourselves when we start to feel more abundant, more love, more of anything we don't feel we deserve. I love that quote from you. Now we go on to authenticity. You then spoke about number 3, authenticity is not only essential for staying in integrity, it's a powerful manifestation tool. Being authentic is like riding a unicycle. It takes a while to get graceful at it, so be patient at first. Then we went on to the power of taking responsibility for your life. If you take responsibility as an opportunity to bring forth your genius and the genius of others, you soar to heights you may never have suspected you are capable of. Beautiful models. And I love the systems you've been sharing as well. You expressed to us the importance of meditation. You expressed to us the importance of relationship as a spiritual path. You've been married since 81, and you said through 35 or so years we've been together and worked together. We've published books like Conscious Loving together, and in our new book to be published October 20, we focus on relationships as the second half of life. Love that. And finally, you shared another thing which I thought was just a profound quote, which was your daily mantra, your daily affirmation. I just want to make sure I got that right. but I'd love for you to say it. It was about expanding in creativity and love. Could you share that with us?
Yes, it's a present tense living thing. I expand in love and creativity every day as I inspire others to do the same.
Wow, I love that. I expand in love and creativity every day because those two are such important aspects of our being. And as we wrap up, Kay, there was one more system or daily habit that you wanted to talk about, and that's called physical vibrance. And you certainly show this as I'm watching you right now. Tell us about physical vibrance.
Well, I think as a human being, I've really benefited from something that was on one of my wife's t-shirts when I first met her. She had a t-shirt that said, "If it's physical, it's therapy." And because she was really into exercise and dance and things like that, that I was interested in, but I didn't really do much of. And so thanks to her inspiration, as well as just, getting to be a better friend to my own body, I put a lot of attention into doing things physically. Like I ride my bike probably 300 days a year here because it's sunny and nice where I live in Southern California. So I'm on my bike. I was on my bike today. I'm on my bike every day. I go to the gym 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 a.m. and spend an hour doing things like lifting weights and doing balancing exercises and things with a personal trainer who he just relentlessly just pushes me all the time to the edge. But I love it because I'm not really interested in being a bodybuilder or anything, but I want to keep my muscles full of blood and expanding with vibrance all the time. And so I think that pretty much everything I do is pretty much devoted to somehow feeling more physically alive and more able to be in the moment. I think in the old days when I was carrying around that extra weight, it was like part of me was in the moment, but the rest of me was in the past. And so now it feels like after many years of being devoted to physical vibrance that through breath work and through dance, my wife and I dance a lot now, and you've seen us on the dance floor. We're probably the oldest couple on many dance floors, but we both love to do ska dancing, and Gogol Bordello's our favorite dance band. Pretty much.
I know that's something we connected on. Gogol Bordello. Guys, if you're listening to this, Google Gogol Bordello, Gogolbordello. It's mine and Gay's favorite band, and it's a Ukrainian gypsy punk rock band. But you have to see them. You have to see them perform.
You have to see them perform, and their lead singer he's from a different planet. I swear. But anyway, I've been to see them many, many times, and that's an example to me of physical vibrance, because from the moment they start to play, you can't stop moving. I mean, it's just like one thing after the other. And so I come home exhausted but happy.
Thank you, Kay. Kay, this was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful message and training that you gave all of us. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And Gay's book, The Big Leap, highly recommend that. You can see that in the background behind Gay. You can find that on Amazon. Thank you all for listening.